Child Killers Explained. Case 1. Peter Woodcock, the boy who never stopped. Peter Woodcock was born in Ontario, Canada, and within days of his birth, he was given up. Adoption followed, then foster placements, then another adoption. By the time he had a stable home, the damage was already accumulating. He was isolated at school, relentlessly bullied, and showed signs of severe emotional disturbance that adults around him struggled to address. He had no friends, no real anchor, and a growing interior world that was becoming dangerous. By his mid-teens, that interior world had produced something that no one around him fully understood: a compulsion toward violence that was specific, organized, and directed at children. At 17, Woodcock killed 3 young children in Toronto over the course of a single year. He lured each victim away from public spaces. He strangled them. In several cases, he bit the bodies afterward. The city was terrified. Parents stopped allowing their children to play outside unsupervised. Police launched one of the most intensive manhunts Toronto had seen. He was eventually connected to a crime scene through witness accounts. When questioned, he confessed. Psychiatrists who evaluated him used a word that would follow him for the rest of his life: psychopathy. He was found not criminally responsible by reason of mental illness and was committed to a high-security psychiatric facility rather than sent to prison. There, he underwent experimental treatment programs designed to manage violent impulses. For decades, he remained institutionalized. In 1991, the system decided he had been contained long enough. On his very first day of supervised release, the first time he had been outside the institution's walls in over 3 decades, Woodcock killed again. The victim was a fellow patient who had accompanied him on the outing. He strangled him in a wooded area almost immediately after stepping outside. The case of Peter Woodcock raises questions that psychiatry still has not cleanly answered. What does rehabilitation mean for someone whose violence is this deeply embedded? What does it mean to declare a person treated when the first test of that treatment ends in another death? Woodcock himself, when asked about the 1991 killing, showed little distress. He described it almost academically. He died in custody in 2010. The system failed to stop him at 17. Then it failed again at 55. Case 2. Alyssa Bustamante, the diary. Alyssa Bustamante was 15 years old and living with her grandparents in St. Martins, Missouri. Her parents were not in the picture, both dealing with addiction and legal problems that had made raising children impossible. On the surface, Bustamante was a teenager living an ordinary enough life in a small town. Underneath that surface, investigators would later find something that shocked even experienced detectives. On October 21, 2009, Bustamante approached her 9-year-old neighbor, Elizabeth Alton, and told her they would spend time together. She led the girl into a wooded area nearby. Once they were alone, she strangled Elizabeth, stabbed her, and cut her throat. She then buried the body in a shallow grave that she had dug days in advance, before Elizabeth had any idea what was being planned for her. The premeditation is what made this case so difficult to process. This was not an impulsive act of violence. The grave existed before the victim walked into the woods. Bustamante had planned it, prepared for it, and then carried it out with a level of organization that most people would not associate with a 15-year-old girl. When investigators searched her home, they found a diary. Inside it were entries that removed any remaining ambiguity about what had happened and why. Bustamante had written about her desire to experience killing. She had listed it among her hobbies on social media. She had described in her own words what the act felt like, entries that the prosecutor later read aloud in court, to a room that went completely silent. Mental health professionals who evaluated her diagnosed major depressive disorder and borderline personality disorder. She had a documented history of self-harm and had previously attempted to take her own life. The psychiatric picture was of a young person in serious distress with no adequate support structure around her, whose thoughts had turned outward in the most catastrophic way possible. She was charged as an adult. In 2012, she pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison with an additional 30 years. Elizabeth Alton was 9 years old. She went with Bustamante because she trusted her. The distance between that trust and what happened next is the part of this case that stays with you. Case 3. Edmund Kemper, what the system released. Edmund Kemper is most often discussed in the context of his adult crimes, the series of killings he carried out across California in the early 1970s that made him one of the most studied serial killers in American history. What gets less attention is where it started and how old he was when it did. Kemper grew up in California in a household defined by his mother. She was emotionally abusive in ways that were systematic and sustained. She humiliated him regularly, mocked his appearance and intelligence, forced him to sleep in the locked basement because she claimed to fear what he might do to his sisters, and then told him the fear itself was evidence that something was wrong with him. He was physically large for his age, socially isolated, and developing a fantasy life that nobody around him could see. As a child, he killed the family's pets. He decapitated his sister's dolls. When asked by his sister what he would do with his teacher if he liked her, he replied that he would have to kill her first. He said it plainly, as a statement of fact. At 15, he shot and killed his grandmother at the kitchen table. When his grandfather returned home shortly after, Kemper shot him too, explaining later that he did not want his grandfather to have to see what he had done to his wife. He then called his mother to tell her what had happened and waited for the police to arrive. When investigators asked why he had done it, he told them he wanted to see what it felt like. He was sent to a psychiatric facility rather than prison on account of his age. What happened there is one of the most consequential failures in the history of the American mental health system. Kemper was highly intelligent and he learned quickly. He studied the tests used to evaluate him. He observed what answers reassured the psychiatrists and which ones raised concern. By the time he was due for review, he had become very good at presenting as recovered. At 21, against the explicit recommendation of at least one clinician who believed he remained dangerous, he was released. Custody was returned to his mother. Over the next several years, Kemper killed 8 people. He targeted young women hitchhiking across California, using his size, his car, and his ability to appear calm and non-threatening to get them inside. His final victims were his mother and her friend. After turning himself in, he expressed frustration that police did not initially believe he was responsible for the murders he was confessing to. Kemper is now in his 70s, still incarcerated, and has given extensive interviews over the decades. He is articulate, self-aware in certain respects, and deeply disturbing in others. He has described his crimes in clinical detail and has also expressed what he characterizes as remorse. Criminologists and FBI profilers have used him as a primary source for understanding how killers think. He helped develop the methodology that later became criminal profiling. The question his case keeps returning to is not complicated. A 15-year-old killed 2 people, was sent to a facility, learned to perform wellness, and was released into the same environment that had helped produce him in the first place. 8 more people died. The system did not miss that he was dangerous. It looked at him, decided he was not, and opened the door. 3 cases, 3 different decades and circumstances. But the same thread runs through all of them. Warning signs that existed long before the worst happened, systems that either missed them or acted too late, and environments that failed these individuals before they failed anyone else. That is not a defense of what any of them did. The victims in each of these cases were real people, and the families they left behind carry consequences that no sentence and no documentary can undo. But if you want to understand how children become killers and how to stop it from happening, the pattern matters. The warning signs matter. And understanding them is the only thing that gives any of this a purpose. If this video gave you something to think about, hit the like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people. And if you want to see more breakdowns like this one, subscribe. There is a lot more to cover.